Hi guys, today we're going to be reviewing a new lens from Canon, the Canon RF 100 to 500mm f4.5 to 7.1 mirrorless lens for the new Canon R5 and R6. But is it any good? Let's find out. And I'm going to start right now. What is up guys, Photo Fever here and welcome back to the channel. And if it's your first time here guys and you want to learn all about Photoshop, Lightroom and everything photography related, start now by subscribing and hitting the bell so you guys don't miss anything. So in this review we're going to be having a closer look at the brand new Canon RF 100 to 500mm f4.5 to 7.1. Now this is a new lens from Canon and it's in fact their new RF mount, which is designed for their new mirrorless cameras such as the Canon R5 and R6. But it is actually replacing an older style lens, the Canon 100 to 400mm. So is it worth buying over that lens if you already own an adapter, or is it worth buying over the other multitude of super telephoto lenses on the market? Let's find out in this review. So the first thing I want to talk about guys is the build quality and the design of this lens. And I must say, as soon as you pick this lens up, you'll notice how much lighter this lens is over the older EF 100 to 400mm. And this is because of the type of materials they're using. Usually, traditionally, when it came to Canon, especially L lenses with a super telephoto reach, they used a lot of aluminium, they used a lot of metals, which really did make them very heavy. Grant you, they did feel really premium, but they were heavy to hold. So what they've done with this lens is they found a hybrid mixture between aluminium and a really, really nice new style plastic resin, which makes it feel really premium, but it really does reduce the weight down. And we will talk about the size and weight in a bit. Now, I must say there is a lot to this lens. There are a ton of features all the way through. The first thing you'll find is you've got a control ring, and this is a clickable control ring that allows you to change a bunch of features within the camera. It's something that all RF lenses have nowadays. So for instance, I have it connected to ISO, but you could have it connected to any type of exposure setting, or even you can have it connecting to white balance. Moving further on, you've obviously got a removable lens collar. Now obviously this collar is quite handy if you're planning on wanting to use it for a monopod, but for the most time I just took it off to save weight. Next to that, you've obviously got a really handy focus ring. Now this is a really smooth and it's a fly-by-wire in construction. Now I must say I didn't really end up using it, but it is nice to have on this lens. Now on the side of the lens, you have 4 independent buttons, which means you can really customize this lens depending on what you're using it for. On the top here, you have a focus limiter switch, which means you can either focus from 80 centimeters to infinity or 3 meters to infinity. It makes it a little bit quicker if you're focusing away on further distant objects such as wildlife or sport photography. Below that, you have got an autofocus to manual focus button. This will allow you to change quickly and independently depending on which way you work. Then below that, you've got your image stabilization, which you can turn on and off. And the image stabilization has got 3 independent modes. Mode 1 is great for overall tracking. Mode 2 is better when you're tracking a subject, either panning left, right, up or down. And then mode 3 is a custom mode that you can set yourself. Then obviously you've got the actual zoom ring itself. Now this does extend, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but to be honest, a 100 to 500mm is kind of expecting that it does extend. Now obviously this lens guys does have weather sealing, so that is a big advantage, but does it have any creep? So what I mean by that is if you go ahead and turn the lens upside down, does it creep outwards? And it does, but Canon have already thought of that. You have got another little ring here, actually tightens the actual zoom ring, so when you go ahead and turn it upside down, and let's say you're walking, it doesn't extend. And you can change it between, it says smooth, or you can do it too tight. So for instance, I keep it roughly in the middle, so it's got a good amount of dampening to it, but it doesn't make it too heavy to go from all the way from 100 all the way to 500mm, because obviously that is a 5 times magnification. So that is a very large focus throw to go all the way from 500 all the way back again. So it is nice to have this little feature that you've got here. Now, obviously this lens does have I must say this is a really, really well made lens hood. It is really, really solid. A lot of lens hoods are just simply made of plastic. This is almost like a double layer to it. But what's great about this lens hood is it has a small lens window, which means if you go ahead and place it on your lens, you can actually use a circular polarizer filter and use that without taking the lens hood off, which is a really nice feature, and I wish other lens manufacturers such as Sigma and Tamron did this. So overall, I'm gonna say the build quality of this lens and the design of this lens is absolutely outstanding, and I can't wait to see other lens implement design, especially from Canon. And if they're gonna keep on going with a design like this, I am going to be loving it. So I'm gonna be giving it a 10 out of 10 for the build quality and the design of the lens. So next, let's talk about the all-important image quality. And first, let's talk about the aperture, which is a bad start from this lens. It only has an f4 to 7.1 aperture, which is actually quite a narrow aperture for a 500mm zoom lens. If we go ahead and compare it to the Sigma 150 to 600mm, that has an aperture of f4 to 6.3, which you can see is a little bit wider even when it's compared to the 500mm versus 600mm that the Sigma offers. But to be honest, this is the only bad point of this lens. The rest of this lens is absolutely pure perfection. This is by far one of the sharpest super telephoto lenses I have ever tested. And I must say, I am testing it on the Canon EOS R5, which is a 45 megapixel full frame sensor. So it's really putting this lens to the test. And I must say, this lens outperformed my wildest dreams. It was absolutely pin sharp. And I must say, the focus of this lens is almost like blindingly quick. It is quicker than you can blink an eye, which is absolutely great if you're planning on wanting to use this lens for any wildlife or any sport photography. Now, annoyingly, I don't live in a great area when it comes to wildlife. There isn't a lot of wildlife out and about. So what I did is outside my house, I had some lovely blossom. So I took some sample images that you can see of the blossom here, and even close up, this lens is absolutely nail-bitingly sharp. And then I took some photos you can see of some lovely birds that are outside my garden. And again, the image quality is exceptional. I grant you, the R5 is a really good camera because obviously it has the animal tracking, it has that lock-on tracking. So you can be really, really successful and accurate with the actual focus motor of this lens. So overall, I was incredibly impressed. Very little chromatic aberration. The distortion in vignetting was pretty much minimal. There was almost no vignetting to be seen, for which I grant you, again, it does have a fairly small aperture of f4.5. And the only other thing I would mention is it's not very good at breaking apart the subject. Again, 500mm at f7.1, you have to have a compression of the subject, so you're gonna have to have the foreground and background very, very far away to get any sort of bokeh. It isn't impossible, it's just slightly more difficult than other lenses on the market. But overall, I was incredibly impressed with the image quality. So again, guys, I'm gonna be giving it another 10 out of 10 for image quality. So now guys, let's talk about the size and weight of this lens and how does it compare? Is it any lighter or is it any heavier than the competitor lenses on the market? Well, firstly, this lens is a lot lighter than the predecessor, and that is because, again, all of those plastics that we were talking about previously, instead of using a lot of heavy metals like aluminium and stuff like that, this lens is a lot lighter but also a lot smaller, even though it has a slightly better focal length from 100 to 500 instead of 100 to 400, only coming in at 1,530 grams or 1.5 kilos. So this lens, to be honest, isn't that heavy, especially when you compare it to the older lens, which comes in at 1,640 grams. And this lens is smaller, which means you don't need to necessarily have such a large camera bag. And if you go ahead and take the lens collar off and take the lens hood off, it is a pretty small lens to start off with. Another great thing about this lens is its minimum filter thread size, only coming in at 77mm, which is far smaller than the Sigma contemporary lens, which comes in at 95mm, and a lot smaller than the sport equivalent, which comes in at 105mm, which means you can use normal protection NDs and circular polarizer filters that won't break the bank, and they're a fairly easy size to come by, and most photography shops will have them in stock. But they aren't the only lenses on the market. There are in fact 2 Sigma lenses to talk about, and I've actually reviewed both of those lenses, which are absolutely amazing. Firstly, let's talk about the contemporary lens. This is the Sigma 150 to 600 contemporary lens. That comes in at a whopping 1,930 grams, so almost 500 grams heavier than this lens, and it is a lot larger. But again, guys, you are getting a slightly further reach of 600mm. And now let's talk about the sport lens. Now this has got a lot better weather sealing, using a lot heavier metals like aluminium instead of using plastic like the contemporary and like the Canon. This comes in at a whopping 2,860 grams. You're right, this particular lens is almost 3 kilos and double the weight of this lens. So if you're after a very small and very compact lens, then this Canon 100 to 500mm is definitely going to be the lens for you. So for that reason, I'm going to be giving it an 8 out of 10. Not because it is a massive lens, but it is by far one of the smallest super telephoto lenses designed for Canon's full frame camera. So now let's talk about the focus motor and image stabilization. And straight away, the lens has image stabilization, which is great, but not just normal image stabilization. If you go ahead and let's say place this on a Canon R or an RP, it has 5 stops of image stabilization, which is amazing. But it gets even better when you go ahead and place it with either the Canon R5, which is the camera I'm using today, or if you go ahead and place it on the Canon EOS R6. That offers, in conjunction with both of them, up to 8 stops of image stabilization, which is absolutely amazing and by far one of the highest image stabilizations I have ever seen. Usually you'd get maybe 5.5, that's usually the max, but 8 stops when you use it with a Canon EOS R5 or R6, that is really, really good. So you're going to be able to shoot very, very low shutter speeds, even though this is a super telephoto lens. And I must say, it was really, really precise. And in fact, you have 3 different modes. Mode 1 is for just general purpose. You've got mode 2, which is a little bit better for tracking subjects, left, right, up and down. And then you've actually got mode 3, which is a custom mode, which you can set yourself in camera. So this lens is really good when it comes to the low light performance. But that isn't just all with this lens. Let's talk a bit about the focus motor. Now, this has actually got 2 focus motors. They're both nano USM motors, which means they're really, really quiet. I could barely hear it. In fact, the only loudness of this lens pretty much came from the actual image stabilization, which made a slight whirring sound. But to be honest, this lens was almost silent. But I must say, this is by far fastest autofocus lenses I have ever seen. As you can see, I'm focusing from the foreground and then I'm focusing back again, and this is in video mode, so it's not as quick as photo mode, and it was still really, really fast. But it's also incredibly precise as well. And when you go ahead and use the lock-on tracking for either animals or even people with the Canon EOS R5 or R6, it is really, really good. I must say, in conjunction, these two are a great pair. The R5 with the 100 to 500mm, they are a really, really good. And if you're thinking of if you already own the R5 or already own the R6, this lens is going to be blindingly quick and one of the best lenses you own when it comes to autofocus. So for that reason, I'm going to be giving this lens another 10 out of 10 for focus motor, and it's an amazing image stabilization. And last but most importantly comes the price. And annoyingly, this is not a cheap lens. But firstly, let's talk about the competitor lenses, and let's start off with the cheapest super telephoto lens on the market. And this is the Sigma 150 to 600mm Contemporary. That only comes in at £849. But again, do bear in mind, guys, this is an EF lens, not an RF lens. So you are going to have to buy, if you don't already own one, an EF to RF adapter, which comes in currently at £119. So do bear in mind, you're going to have to add this to the price if you don't currently own an EF to RF adapter. But still, this lens is by far the cheapest super telephoto lens on the market, only coming in, guys, again at £849. Next up is the sport lens equivalent. That is the Sigma 150 to 600mm, coming in at £1,329. Now this offers slightly better image quality and slightly better overall performance, but again, you are paying a little bit more of a premium. Again, a little bit more expensive, and do bear in mind, again, guys, this is a EF lens, not an RF lens, so you're gonna have to buy that converter. Next up is the older Mark II version, the Canon 100 to 400mm f4.5 to 5.6. This is the older version of the lens we're testing today. And again, you're gonna have to use that EF to RF adapter. This lens comes in at £2,279, which, to be honest, for a lens of that caliber is to be honest, fairly reasonably priced. But now we're going to be talking about this lens here. And there's shame this lens comes in at an astonishing £2,979. by far one of the most expensive super telephoto lenses, and is one of the most expensive lenses you can buy for the RF mount. Bear in mind that obviously they do a 400mm and a 600mm, which are astronomically expensive. But to be honest, this lens is very, very expensive for what it is, especially when you think it offers a 7.1 aperture at 500mm, where the Sigma only offers an aperture of 6.3 at the same focal length. So for that reason, I just can't rank it any higher than this. I'm only going to be giving it a 4 out of 10 because this lens really is by far out of budget for most photographers. Unless you're a professional photographer, you're going to have to rent this lens. So what are my final thoughts with this lens, and should you buy this lens over the cheaper Sigma lenses? Well, my answer is yes and no, really depending on where you're coming from. If you're more of an amateur photographer and you're not someone that wants to splurge £3,000 on a lens, then the Sigma lens really is an amazing lens to use, especially the contemporary lens, coming in at almost a third of the price of this lens. But if you're a professional photographer and you want the best image quality and the best optics for a fairly small size, then you just can't go wrong with this lens. This is by far the best Canon full telephoto lens on the market ever. It is absolutely amazing. The sharpness coupled with the amazing ultrasonic motor and the image stabilization that you get with the Canon R5 and R6, this lens truly is absolutely amazing. So let's have a look at the final results. So as you can see, coming in at an overall score of 42 out of 50, this is a highly recommended lens. And I'm going to be giving a gold award to this lens because of its amazing sharpness and that super precise autofocus motor. So overall, this lens is highly recommended. Again, guys, if you want to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, it really does help my channel grow. Also, guys, if you want to hit the bell notification, so you guys don't miss any of my latest content. Now, I've got my latest lens review just up here, and my latest Photoshop tutorial you can find just down here. But until next time, guys, keep creating.